my sister stabbed my baby shower cake 47 times, screaming, "You ruined my life." I'm 8 months pregnant, and the day that was supposed to celebrate my baby ended up becoming the day my entire life shattered in front of everyone I loved, because it started like something out of a dream. Soft sunlight pouring through the curtains of my living room, pastel decorations carefully hung the night before, a table full of gifts from friends and relatives, and in the center of it all, a beautiful white cake with tiny pink flowers that my best friend had ordered for me, and I remember standing there with my hands resting on my belly, feeling my daughter move, thinking that maybe, just maybe, everything in my life had finally settled into something peaceful after years of quiet tension. Especially with my older sister, who had always had a complicated relationship with me, but I still invited her because she was family, and I wanted things to be different this time. I wanted us to be different, and for a while, it seemed like it might actually happen because when she arrived, she smiled, hugged me, even placed her hand on my stomach, and said something soft that I couldn't quite hear over the noise, and I thought maybe we were finally moving past everything. Maybe all those years of competition and bitterness were behind us. But I didn't know then that what I was seeing wasn't peace, it was calm before something violent and irreversible. Because everything changed in a single moment, when it was time to cut the cake. Everyone gathered around, laughing, phones out, my husband standing beside me with his hand lightly on my back, my mother watching closely from across the room, and my sister standing just a little too still near the table, her eyes fixed on me in a way that made something cold crawl up my spine. But before I could even process it, she suddenly stepped forward, grabbed the knife from my hand, and without warning, drove it straight into the cake with such force that the entire room went silent. And then she did it again, and again, and again, stabbing it over and over like she was trying to destroy something alive, her breathing turning sharp and uneven, her face twisted with something that didn't look like anger anymore but something deeper, something broken. And I remember someone gasping behind me, someone else saying her name, but no one moved fast enough, not even me, because I was frozen watching her destroy that cake like it meant something far more than it did, and then she screamed, loud enough to echo against the walls, her voice cracking as she shouted that I had ruined her life, that I had always taken everything from her, that this baby was just another way for me to steal attention, and before I could even react, she turned toward me, still holding the knife. And for a split second I saw exactly what she was about to do. I saw her eyes drop to my stomach, and I instinctively stepped back. But I didn't get far because suddenly my arms were grabbed from behind, held tightly in place, and when I turned my head in panic, I realized it was my own mother. Her grip firm, her face strangely calm, like she wasn't seeing the same danger I was. Like this was something she expected, something she believed. And I remember shouting at her to let me go, my voice shaking, my heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe, but she didn't loosen her grip, not even when my sister lunged forward, not even when the room erupted into chaos. And in that moment, something inside me broke, not just from fear, but from the realization that I was completely alone in a room full of people who should have protected me, including my husband, who stood there frozen, confusion written across his face, but no urgency, no instinct to step between me and the danger, and that hesitation, that silence felt louder than my sister's screaming, because it told me something was very wrong, something deeper than just this moment. And as everything spiraled around me, as people finally started to move and someone pulled my sister back, as the knife clattered onto the floor and my mother finally let go of me, I stood there shaking, one hand protectively over my stomach, trying to understand how a celebration had turned into something so violent, so surreal, and I kept replaying her words in my head, the way she said I had ruined her life. Because it wasn't just anger, it sounded like something rehearsed, something she truly believed, and that's when the doubt began creeping in, slow and suffocating. Because the way my mother looked at me, the way my husband avoided my eyes, it made me realize this wasn't sudden for them, this wasn't shocking, it was as if they had already heard a version of this story before, a version where I wasn't the victim, but the cause, and standing there surrounded by the remains of a destroyed cake and broken trust, I felt the first wave of something far worse than fear. I felt the beginning of a truth I wasn't ready to face, that whatever my sister believed about me, she hadn't come up with it alone, and somehow, without me even knowing, the people closest to me had already started to believe it too. Didn't sleep that night, not even for a minute, because every time I closed my eyes I saw her face again, the way it twisted when she screamed that I had ruined her life, the way the knife moved in her hand, the way my mother held me still like I was the one who needed to be restrained, and the worst part wasn't even the attack itself, it was what came after, the silence in my own home, the way my husband avoided looking at me as we drove back, the way he kept his hands tight on the steering wheel like he was holding himself back from saying something, and I remember sitting there, one hand on my stomach, whispering to my baby that everything was okay even though I didn't believe it myself, because something had shifted and I could feel it in every small detail, in the way he didn't ask if I was all right, in the way my phone kept buzzing, with messages I was too afraid to open, and when we finally got home I couldn't take it anymore. I asked him directly what was going on, why no one had stopped her, why my own mother had held me like that. And instead of answering me right away, he just sighed, long and heavy, like he had been carrying something for a while, and then he said something that made my entire body go cold. He asked me if there was anything I wanted to tell him, and at first I didn't even understand the question. I thought he meant about the party, about the fight, but then he mentioned my sister's accusations, not like they were ridiculous, not like they were clearly untrue, but like they were something that needed to be clarified, something that might have some truth to them, and I remember laughing, not because it was funny, but because it was so unbelievable, that I didn't know how else to react. I asked him if he actually thought I had done anything to her, and he didn't say yes, but he didn't say no either. And that hesitation felt like a betrayal deeper than anything that had happened earlier, because it meant that somewhere along the line, doubt had already been planted in his mind, and I hadn't even noticed. And that's when he told me that Vanessa had been talking to him for months, sending him things, messages, screenshots, pieces of what she claimed was proof that I had been manipulating people, sabotaging her relationships, even stealing opportunities from her since we were in college. And I remember just staring at him, trying to process what he was saying, because it sounded insane, completely detached from reality. But the way he spoke about it, the way he avoided meeting my eyes, told me that he had taken it seriously, that he had looked at those things and believed, at least partially, that they could be real. And my chest felt tight as I asked him what exactly she had shown him, and he hesitated again before pulling out his phone, scrolling through something, and then handing it to me, and what I saw made my stomach drop, because there were screenshots of conversations that looked like they were from my number, messages that sounded like me but twisted, cruel, manipulative, saying things about her, about him, about other people in our lives. Things I would never say, things that painted me as someone calculating and selfish, someone who took pleasure in hurting her, and for a moment, just a split second, I felt this horrifying doubt creep into my own mind, not because I thought I had written them, but because they, so real, so detailed, that it was terrifying. To think someone had gone to that extent to create them, and I told him immediately that they were fake, that I had never sent anything like that, but he pointed out details, timestamps, references to real events, things that made it harder to dismiss outright, and I could see the conflict in his expression, the way he wanted to believe me but couldn't completely ignore what he had been shown, and that's when I realized just how deep this had gone, how carefully it had been constructed, because this wasn't just a sudden outburst at a party, this was something planned, something built over time, piece by piece, until it became convincing enough to turn people against me. And I asked him why he hadn't told me sooner, why he had kept this from me, and he said he didn't want to stress me during the pregnancy, that he thought it would resolve itself, that he believed my sister might just be going through something, but that answer only made things worse, because it meant he had been quietly doubting me for months, while pretending everything was fine, and I felt something crack inside me as I realized I had been living in a version of my life that wasn't real, where trust had already started to erode without my knowledge, and after that conversation, I couldn't stay in that house, not with that feeling hanging in the air, so I packed a small bag and went to my friend's place, the only person I knew who would listen without judgment. And when I showed her everything, when I explained what had happened, she didn't hesitate, she didn't question me, she just said one thing that grounded me again. She said this wasn't just emotional. This was calculated, and if someone had gone through the effort of creating fake evidence, then there would be mistakes, traces, inconsistencies, things we could find if we looked closely enough. And for the first time since the baby shower, I felt something other than fear. I felt determination, because I knew I hadn't done any of the things I was being accused of, and if I didn't fight back, if I didn't prove it, then those lies would become the truth in everyone else's eyes. And I refused to let that happen. Not for myself, and definitely not for my child, who deserved to be born into a life where her mother wasn't seen as a villain. And that night, sitting on my friend's couch with my phone in my hand and my heart still racing from everything that had happened, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to tear apart every single piece of that false story, no matter how long it took, no matter what it revealed, because whatever my sister had started, I was going to finish it by exposing the truth, even if it meant destroying the last pieces of my family in the process. The truth didn't come all at once, it came in pieces, slow and sharp, like something being pulled out of me thread by thread, because what I thought would take days ended up taking weeks of going through old messages, backups, emails, even cloud archives I hadn't opened in years, and every step of it made one thing clearer: this hadn't just been a lie, it had been built carefully, deliberately, with the kind of patience that only comes from obsession. Because the screenshots my sister had sent weren't random, they were crafted using real conversations I'd had, edited just enough to twist their timestamps, adjusted, names cropped, entire sections rewritten to make me sound like someone I didn't recognize. And the worst part was realizing how convincing it all looked at first glance, because if I hadn't lived those moments myself, I might have believed them too. And I remember sitting there with my friend late one night, when we finally found the first real crack in her story, an original message thread, saved in my old phone backup that completely contradicted one of the key proofs she had used, and that moment felt like oxygen after drowning, because it meant this wasn't perfect, it wasn't untouchable, it could be broken, and from there, everything started to unravel faster, We found inconsistencies in dates, duplicate metadata, even signs that some of the images had been edited multiple times, and with each discovery, my fear slowly turned into something steadier, something stronger, because I wasn't just defending myself anymore, I was building a case, piece by piece, until it became impossible to ignore, and when I finally felt like I had enough, I did something that terrified me. I sent everything to my husband, every original file, every comparison, every proof that what he had been shown wasn't just misleading, it was completely fabricated, and then I waited, hours that felt like days, my mind racing with every possible outcome, until finally he called me, and I could hear it in his voice before he even said anything. The shift, the realization, the guilt. And when he spoke, it wasn't defensive anymore. It wasn't uncertain, it was broken, because he admitted he had been wrong, that he should have trusted me, that he couldn't believe how far things had gone without him seeing it clearly, and I wanted to feel relief in that moment. I wanted to just accept it and move forward, but it wasn't that simple. Because trust doesn't come back just because the truth is revealed. It comes back slowly, if it comes back at all, and I told him that. I told him I needed space, that I needed time, not just for myself but for our child, because I wasn't going to bring her into a situation where doubt could replace trust again. And to his credit, he didn't argue, he didn't try to justify anything, he just said he understood. And that was the first honest moment we'd had in a long time, but he wasn't the only one who needed to see the truth, because my mother was harder, much harder. And when I showed her everything, when I laid it all out in front of her, expecting at least some acknowledgement, some regret, she didn't react the way I hoped. She didn't apologize. She didn't even fully accept it. Instead, she deflected, said things like maybe there had been misunderstandings on both sides, that families are complicated, that my sister must have been under pressure, and in that moment, I realized something painful but necessary. She wasn't going to choose the truth if it meant admitting she had been wrong. She was going to choose the version of reality that was easier for her to live with, even if it meant losing me, and that realization hurt more than anything else. Because it meant I couldn't fix this. I couldn't repair something that the other person refused to even acknowledge was broken. And so I made another decision, one that felt just as heavy as the first. I stepped back. I created distance, not out of anger, but out of necessity. I had to protect myself and my child from a situation that had already proven how dangerous it could become, and legally I didn't hesitate. I filed a report for what had happened at the baby shower, documented everything, changed the locks to my home, and made it clear that what my sister had done wasn't just a family issue. It was an act of violence, and I wasn't going to pretend otherwise. And for a while, everything went quiet, no messages, no calls, just this strange, heavy calm that settled over my life. And then weeks later, just before I gave birth, a letter arrived, handwritten, addressed to me, and I knew immediately who it was from before I even opened it, and when I finally did, my hands trembling despite everything I had already faced. What I read didn't feel like closure, but it was the closest thing to it I was ever going to get, because she admitted everything, not in a dramatic way, not trying to justify it, just stating it plainly, that she had created the fake evidence, that she had convinced herself over time that I was the reason for her failures, that losing her job and facing eviction had pushed her into a place where blaming me felt easier than facing herself. And she wrote that somewhere along the way, she started believing her own lies, that they became real to her, and that by the time of the baby shower she wasn't acting anymore. She genuinely thought she was confronting the person who had ruined her life. And reading that didn't make me forgive her. It didn't erase anything, but it did answer the question that had been haunting me from the beginning. Why? And sometimes, even a painful answer is better than none at all. And at the end of the letter, she said she had checked herself into a psychiatric facility, that she didn't expect forgiveness, only that I would understand that what she did came from something broken inside her, not from who I truly was. And after that, there was nothing more to say, nothing more to uncover, just the quiet reality of everything that had happened. And then my daughter was born, and the moment I held her, everything shifted again. Not because the past disappeared, but because it stopped being the center of everything. Because in that moment, she became the reason I moved forward, the reason I chose stability over chaos, truth over denial, and boundaries over broken relationships. And my husband, slowly, carefully, worked to rebuild what he had damaged, through honesty, through consistency, through showing up in ways he hadn't before, and I allowed that process, not because it was easy, but because it felt possible. And as for my mother, that distance remained, not out of spite, but because some things can't be repaired, unless both sides are willing, and she never was. And maybe she never will be, but I've made peace with that in my own way, because I've learned that family isn't just about who stays, it's about who chooses to stand beside you when the truth is tested. And as I look back now at that day, at the cake, the knife, the accusations, it no longer feels like the moment my life was destroyed. It feels like the moment everything hidden was finally exposed. And from that, I built something stronger. Something real. Something my daughter will grow up in, knowing that no matter how convincing a lie can be, the truth, if you fight for it, will always find its way to the surface.